What's up, everybody? This is Mason Plumley. I'm really excited about the discussion that we're going to have tonight. We have a lot of thought leaders in healthcare that are tuning in from all over the place. So we're going to bring these guys on, and this event is about the audience. So we want you guys to ask questions, and that'll make this an even better discussion. So tonight, first of all, we have Mesfin Tegenu, who is the president of Perform Rx, a pharmacy benefit manager creating customized clinical solutions for Medicaid, Medicare, commercial plans, and employer groups across the country. They currently cover about 6 million lives. And as I've gotten to know Mesfin, I realized that there's nothing that happens in the pharma space that he's not consulted on. So he's the most forward-thinking and innovative leader in the pharmacy world. So let's bring Mesfin on and have him introduce himself.
Thank you, Mason. Mesfin Tegenu. I have been in the industry for about 20 years. We're developing different products, solutions to the delivery of pharmaceutical care to our customers. And thank you, Mason, for inviting me, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks. Well, we're excited to have you. So we have Mesfin. Also, we have Darius Shahida. Darius is the Chief Strategy and Business Officer at Butterfly Network in an effort to democratize medical imaging by way of a portable ultrasound probe. Before Butterfly, 70% of the world did not have access to medical imaging. While he was a student at HBS, he raised $250 million for Butterfly, and now he oversees their global health, commercial, and strategic efforts. Darius also oversees the 4Catalyzer incubator that's in Guilford, Connecticut, whose mission is to transform medicine through smart device. So let's bring Darius on.
Thank you, Mason. It's a pleasure to meet everyone. As you just mentioned, really our mission and our goal, not just at Butterfly, but more broadly at 4Catalyzer, is quite simple. We create technologies for the benefit of humanity, and our focus is really to democratize what were traditionally cumbersome and expensive technologies with easy to use, affordable, and ubiquitous, in many cases, semiconductor-based technologies. And what you see here in my hand is actually an example of the semiconductor chip, which sits in the transducer of our low-cost ultrasound. And this device, which I'm holding in my hand, is actually the world's lowest cost and first portable whole-body ultrasound, which we introduced commercially just last year. So excited to tell you more about what we're up to at Butterfly, and thank you for having me on the panel tonight, Mason.
Great, thanks, Darius. And last but not least, we have Ronnie Chatterji, who's the Democratic nominee for the State Treasurer of North Carolina. We want to give his campaign a shout out for bringing him on here. He is an economist and a tenured professor at Duke's Fuqua Business School and the Sanford School of Public Policy. He previously served as the senior economist at the White House Council of Economic Advisors. He has received several awards for his research, including the 2017 Kauffman Prize Medal for Distinguished Research in Entrepreneurship.
Hey, Mason, great to be here. I've been a professor and economist at Duke since 2006, and now I'm running for office in North Carolina, learning about the crazy world of politics. And in less than 20 days, if I'm successful, I'll run the state health plan in North Carolina, which manages the healthcare for over 700,000 state employees.
That's awesome. And you definitely have the best backdrop of the panel. So.
Room Raider. My wife did this for me after my first Zoom chats. It looked like I was broadcasting from a dungeon.
Love it. Love it. Great. Well, honestly, guys, this is so cool. You know, I've never done something like this before, so I appreciate you guys taking the time to come on. You know, I think it's a very relevant discussion. I've had the privilege of getting to know yourselves and understand that you guys are the most forward-thinking people that I've met in your respective industries. So let's jump into it. You know, you guys are all seeking to change and improve others' lives through healthcare. So what are some of the challenges that you're facing in your industry as you think about access, affordability, and ultimately improving the quality of care? And why don't we start with you, Mesfin, and then we'll just go around.
Yes, there are a lot of good things that are being done today to improve quality of care and healthcare deliveries in general. And some of the challenges, obviously, we see in the space we are in is a lot of regulations are being passed or discussed and or entertained in different states and in different in all 50 states, including the federal government. Those legislations that interfere in sort of, and probably out of goodwill, but generally has a sort of a challenging outcome whenever you legislate certain things. So that's an area that we are closely watching to make sure the market, the free market concept is not too much impacted by these regulations that can negatively impact the service that we deliver. Again, in terms of on the political side, there are various executive orders that are being published with unknown consequences, which we're looking to see how that's going to improve or impact the way we provide services, deliver services to our beneficiaries across the country. The healthcare cost, pharmaceutical cost is an issue, as you all know. We are working towards figuring out how that can be managed better and delivered, and so in all areas, both in the care delivery part as well as in actually manufacturing these products part. So in all areas, we are trying to figure out what is the best and the most efficient way to get the products out, and then to get the services delivered in equitable and affordable manner.
Right. So Mesfin, if I can ask one question about that, pharma pricing is a hot topic. We heard the presidential candidates debating over it. Back in September, the president approved a plan for 6 states to buy their drugs from Canada at a lower price point. Is this something that North Carolina should consider?
So pharmaceutical products are the price are going up. It looks like it's primarily driven of what's called specialty drugs. That's what's driving the cost unusually high. So a variety of strategies are being applied today to somehow get control of that issue. The one could be challenging the health system with what the president's executive action is demanding, which is to allow importation of drugs from Canada, as long as we are able to make sure that the quality is guaranteed. I think North Carolina should think about how to do it and how to do it safely and effectively. At the minimum, whether we are able to import and help patients who have high deductible plans, those are the patients most exposed to high cost drugs. Whether we can help them by getting those low price products of the same quality, or at the minimum we'll push a serious conversation within the United States and within the pharmaceutical industry to deal with the rising price of pharmaceuticals.
Darius, how do you guys on the device side, what's your effort as you think about Butterfly, Hyperfine, some of the companies that you guys are working with in improving the keywords of access, affordability, and quality of care?
Yeah, so I think Mesfin in his response on one of the key issues that not just this nation but broadly the globe is facing with respect to healthcare, and that's access. The other is, of course, the cost of care. And as a nation, obviously, we know we spend nearly 17% of our GDP on healthcare, which is not necessarily commensurate with the outcomes that we see. And we can get into quantifiably how we look at that. The proliferation of chronic illness is one such key issue that is clear that we're not seeing a commensurate increase in outcomes. But at Butterfly, we're really focused with our solution on exactly those two issues: the issue of access, the fact, as you mentioned, that nearly 2/3 of the world's population has no access to medical imaging, which frankly is not just disappointing, but a tragedy when you consider the fact that ultrasound as an imaging modality is ubiquitous and harmless, right? But then the other issue is the cost of care, right? If you look, for example, at the ultrasound technologies that are on the market, the vast majority of them are extremely and prohibitively expensive, with an average cost of about $80,000 for cart-based solutions. And they're quite cumbersome to use. They require a level of clinical training and sophistication that frankly is limiting the use and the proliferation of the technology. And so our approach was very simple. With semiconductor-based solution, we introduced the world's first whole body ultrasound at a fraction of the cost of any of the incumbent technologies, with $2,000. We also addressed the issue of ease of use by actually leveraging artificial intelligence and machine learning applications, which automate a lot of the interpretations that would traditionally require advanced clinical training and education. And so broadly speaking, our approach has been to hit both of those issues head on. And this is very much the playbook we have across Catalyzer with each of our technologies. We have another company called Hyperfine, which has introduced the world's first portable MRI, which we priced at less than $75,000 and which wheels right up to the bedside. And that's in an environment where the typical MRI costs upwards of $1.5 million. We've also introduced, and we're working on introducing, I should say, rapid diagnostic testing for COVID with our company Homodeus. And really the premise and playbook, as I said, is the same for each of these companies. Take what was traditionally cumbersome and prohibitively expensive technology, innovate at the low end, introduce disruptive and new technologies, and democratize access to these technologies in so doing. And that's been our playbook so far. And we feel that we can drive meaningful impact, not just in the developing world, where there's clearly no access, but also in the developed world, in places like the United States and North Carolina, where unfortunately access to care is not universal, and the outcomes are not commensurate with the spending that we see in this country.
Ronnie, do you want to chime in from the state side, how you guys think about, I guess first share with us your views on how the state has handled the healthcare spend and how you see it coming out of COVID?
Yeah, sure. So first, it's an honor to be here with Mesfin and Darius. I think when you think about how we're going to deal with issues around healthcare access and affordability in the United States and North Carolina, the role of innovation and entrepreneurship is so central. So speaking as someone who has for 15 years taught medical device innovators and healthcare innovators kind of the principles of strategic management and how to bring products to market, what these two are working on are huge parts of what we need to think about as part of solutions. And I'm really proud that the students at Duke, your alma mater, Mason, and where I teach are super excited about entrepreneurship and innovation in healthcare. We have a specific cohort of students who are targeting that vis-a-vis other kinds of places where they could do entrepreneurship. And I think that when you look at entrepreneurship in healthcare, you're more often to find mission-driven companies like the one these two gentlemen are involved in, and ones where people can find a lot of meaning at work because the end products they're creating can save people's lives. And so that's the first thing I think we got to remember. But when these students come to class, I do talk a lot about how developing a medical device or a pharmaceutical product or anything in healthcare is very different than building an app that you can sell in the App Store. It's very different. And one of the reasons is it's a highly regulated space. And it's a highly regulated space in large part, but not only because of the safety issues, but also because the government is a huge payer for healthcare, not just in the United States, but around the world. And so when the government is a huge payer for healthcare, they're the ones paying the bills, it's clearly going to be regulated and it's going to be very political. And so I try to help my students understand the impact of politics and political decisions on business decisions. And that's something that any healthcare innovator and entrepreneur is going to need to think about. And it's not going to go away, not in 10 years, not in 20 years, as long as the government is the largest payer of healthcare in many contexts. Now, if I'm lucky enough to be the one running the state health plan, I see a lot of improvements that we could have in the way we do that. My parents were both public educators, so I grew up covered by a state insurance plan. And that was the best insurance plan in my small town. But the challenges to a lot of states is making sure that people have coverage and that people are getting access to the best possible care. But at least in North Carolina, we haven't been measuring quality. This will be elementary for you guys, but when I talk to folks outside healthcare, I say, when I buy toys for the kids on Amazon for Christmas, I used to just look at the price, but then the toys would break on December 25th, like that evening, because my 3 kids go hard, okay, on the Christmas toys. But I also got to look at the stars, right? I got to look at the value. And when you think about healthcare, it's an industry that not all payers are really paying on price and value, the stars. And so one thing I'd like to do in North Carolina, one thing that I can think would improve our state health plan and get us better value is to start aligning the payments we make, which are about $3.3 billion a year, with actual outcomes. And as you guys all know, this isn't pie in the sky stuff because many health systems are already striking deals with payers along those lines, with Medicare, with Blue Cross Blue Shield in North Carolina. And if the largest payer of healthcare in North Carolina, namely the state health plan, can align the way we pay with those others, oh my gosh, right? That's when you see a tipping point in the delivery system that can make North Carolina a leader and hopefully a destination for innovators like these two to develop and commercialize their products.
That's awesome. Sorry, Mesfin, go ahead.
No, I actually like what Ronnie said. I mean, it's we are preparing to provide services in North Carolina due to the expansion of the managed Medicaid in that state, and I think the approach, we have to trust innovation, and we have to trust the power of the free market, and then we are totally be fine. We'll be really good. If we look into some of the pipelines, some of the products that are out there, Darius talked about artificial intelligence-driven technologies, which improve efficiency amazingly. There are next generation sequencing technology, which actually targets therapies to a patient's gene, and you can sequence the therapy accordingly. There is the 3D printer devices that are making very highly customized in medical technology and make it available ready for use. So the immunotherapy is another amazing technology that's now being used for the treatment of potentially significant cancer patients with significant outcome and with lower side effects. We have a cost of care diagnostics technologies where you get the patient diagnosed right at point of sale, and then take care of issues there. There is this virtual reality technology that simulates environment that could accelerate the situation, and you can do your testing accordingly. I mean, there are the biosensors and trackers for diabetics and asthma patients. Amazing technologies. If you are talking about outcome-driven services, the space that Darius is in is one of the areas that's going to make a huge difference. So that there is a telehealth. Telehealth now, thanks to COVID, telehealth is now amazingly serving as well. So a variety of activities to reduce healthcare costs and improve delivery, making it better for us. So as we go as we proceed into going into the future, it's not going to be healthcare delivery is not going to be what used to be. It has to change. It will change. The cost versus outcome versus the cost benefit analysis is questionable at this point. The amount of money that's spent and the outcome. So the value-based contracts will start to shift this to actual outcomes, and so we are into an exciting time. So in North Carolina, Ronnie, whatever all the stuff that you outlined, are going to actually carry the stage, probably a pioneer into launching some advanced technologies and better approach for healthcare delivery.
And this, I mean, Mason, I'll say this can also equal jobs. We talk a lot in the political side, my new world, about the urban-rural divide, not just North Carolina, but everywhere. But if you go to rural areas in North Carolina, one of the biggest employers is actually health systems. And if you think about healthcare as a job creator in lots of different parts of this country, including rural areas in North Carolina, these developments can be even more promising. And so I think it's not just going to be an area of innovation entrepreneurship, it's also going to be an area that creates jobs for Americans and folks who embrace these kinds of innovations. So that's the other exciting piece of the agenda.
That's awesome. Mesfin, to some of the technologies that you were talking about, I'm going to put Darius on the spot to share a story with us. I think with a lot of the telehealth solutions, so obviously the drug discovery that the government's funding, you're seeing things expedited. You're seeing, I don't want to say relaxed regulation, but people are more open now than ever to seeing healthcare delivery in a different way. So Darius, I know you had an experience with Butterfly internationally that was really interesting. Do you want to share that with the group?
Sure. Yeah. So, going back to March of this year, at the height of the pandemic, when there was a lot of uncertainty around the protocol and how to respond to such an unprecedented event, it became clear very quickly that point-of-care ultrasound could be a very effective tool in the triage and monitoring of patients who were exhibiting symptoms of COVID, namely, striations in the lungs called B-lines. And so what became clear in the academic research at the time was that a solution like Butterfly, a low-cost, affordable, and harmless imaging modality could be used to really help improve patient outcomes by triaging patients much earlier on when they were first exhibiting symptoms, and to help prioritize, particularly in congested healthcare systems, who would receive care and really rank that based on priority. What we saw back in March was a proliferation of requests coming internationally to actually accelerate the approval process for our technology so that this device could be used in many settings outside of the United States for this triage. And we actually saw that in Canada with Health Canada giving us a regulatory approval, in less than a week. We also saw it in Argentina, where frankly, there's a tremendous issue with access to care. And the rural dynamic that Ronnie just elucidated is particularly pronounced there. So we had a number of countries reaching out to us, and in a matter of days and weeks, giving us approval to actually commercialize our technology in their countries as part of the COVID response. And it was a very motivating time for our team, because we could actually see very tangibly that we were driving an impact in the response that many countries were having at the government level down in the response to COVID.
That's awesome. Another point you touched on, Mesfin, was value-based care. To me, this is something that's talked a lot about in healthcare. It seems that the payers want it, the providers want it, and ultimately the patients will benefit from it. Ronnie, when you speak about aligning with certain efforts, how can a state come in and support value-based initiatives?
Yeah, so I think the first thing in every state, and I'm more knowledgeable obviously in North Carolina than anywhere else, but there needs to be sort of cooperation between all the stakeholders. And you're right, you need to think about where the health systems and providers are and their views towards value-based care. And depending on the payer mix and the populations that these organizations serve, there might be different opinions on it. You then have the commercial insurance piece, and there might be many different insurance players in a particular place that have different views on it, different capabilities as organizations in terms of the data infrastructure and also the network to be able to deliver it. And then, of course, on the state side, how does the state health plan or the state HHS, Health and Human Services, regard value-based care? North Carolina has a really interesting configuration where there's a lot of alignment, which is what's really exciting. We haven't had the biggest payer, the state health plan there. And honestly, I mean, this is where the politics comes in. I mean, if I'm elected, right, we can take a new direction in that area because I have a different idea of what works for people in North Carolina. So it does show you sometimes the importance of these elections and determining things about the future of healthcare. I think when I think about organizations in North Carolina, I do think a couple things are needed. We definitely need to understand better what those value-based outcomes are going to be and get a sense to make sure we don't have measurement fatigue. What I hear from a lot of providers is that they're being assessed on all sorts of different metrics, and there needs to be more harmonization on these things. Otherwise, you're going to have a situation where we're not measuring the right things, we're measuring too many things. The second thing is, what does accountability really look like? And is it creating perverse incentives to game the metrics? A lot of folks look at some of the metrics used in value-based care and they say, well, then the organization, the hospital, for example, might change the way they do things in a way that's consistent with maximizing the metric, but not necessarily maximizing long-term outcomes, the thing that's really hard to measure and capture. To me, these are not insurmountable barriers. I think these are things that we work on. This is a project for innovators and entrepreneurs, people inside public sector organizations, inside private sector organizations to work on. They are challenges though. And so I think what you do is the states that march down that learning curve, to use one of the lessons from business school, I'm sure Darius has seen a bunch of times, right? At HBS, if you march down that learning curve, those are the states, those are the institutions that are going to be furthest ahead. And so that's what we need to do when it comes to value-based care. And I'm pretty optimistic that North Carolina is already making strides to that, and we can continue to.
I think I may just jump in. I think that's a really important point, Ronnie. A lot of folks see value-based care as the panacea to, essentially solve many of the issues we've discussed tonight. The reality is, while I do feel it's a paradigm shift and a very important one from fee-for-service based models, there are opportunities, as you say, for providers to gain the system. And it's really important that, frankly, providers, practitioners, payers go in eyes wide open and understand that, because again, it's not as black and white as I think a lot of the literature and the academics and the even the commentators on the U.S. healthcare system like to paint it. What I can say is invariably a value-based care ecosystem is exactly the type of ecosystem we need to accelerate the adoption of innovative technologies, because it frankly forces a lot of practitioners to be more innovative and to consider creative ways to actually improve patient outcomes and simultaneously improve their bottom line. And so we've seen, for example, a number of really innovative value-based care providers in this country, particularly on the primary care side, who are rolling out technologies like Butterfly, and eventually will be rolling out technologies, I'm sure, like Hyperfine, our portable MRI company, to actually improve patient outcomes in a pretty material way and simultaneously improve their bottom line. And that risk bearing is something which I think is really valuable and important as we consider the adoption of innovation.
That's great. Oh,
yeah.
Sorry. Go ahead, Mesfin.
Yeah, just to add one point on the pharmaceutical in the pharmaceutical world. Earlier, we talked about high cost and value. Trying to figure out to make the best out of the high cost products. The value-based concept applies there as well, especially on really the new drug category called gene therapy, where you have a couple of $1 million per treatment for on improving a patient's condition. Those kind of therapies, as they evolve, we should support the technologies, we should support the research. It's a welcome change, but it has to also be meaningful. It has to work. It has to produce outcome. The outcome has to be measured. So a value-based concept in dealing with this new emerging so-called orphan drugs and gene therapy and all these expensive medications is something that we're exploring as well. And we have seen willingness from pharmaceutical manufacturers who make these products to entertain that model.
That's great. So Ronnie, obviously you're a professor at Duke. Me and Darius were actually classmates at Duke. What role does the academic institutions in the state, the universities, what role do they play in some of these innovations, and how do they support ultimately the healthcare effort in North Carolina?
Oh, I didn't know, Darius, about Duke also, so this is good. We have more Dukies on the call, which is good. You should have come to Fuqua for business school. I love HBS too.
What he didn't tell you is we actually played together on the basketball team, so that's where we met.
I figured something like that. I think I saw you on the court a couple times, but
right.
But I do think the academic institutions play a huge role. One, because they are training the next generation of students, which is really interesting. I mean, hearing Darius and Mesfin talk about the future of healthcare, part of the future of healthcare is going to be these young providers who are now going to medical school and training. What's really exciting about that is, I think having a father-in-law who's a physician, and many people in my family are physicians, the new generation of doctors is very different in terms of why they're going to medicine and why they want to practice. They also have a lot of different opportunities to expand their skill sets, doing MBAs, MPHs, sometimes even starting companies on the side. And so when these young physicians, whether they're residents or medical students, are being trained at academic institutions to align the way they provide care with these value-based metrics, that could be a really powerful lever of change that universities like Duke and yes, UNC and Wake Forest and all the different folks around North Carolina can provide. I also think that academic institutions, through the recipient of federal funding and grants from places like the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Innovation, could also be doing larger scale research projects to figure out what works. So I feel pretty strongly academic institutions could be a fantastic place. The last thing I'll say is, academic institutions tend to have health services researchers, economists, and other folks who are going to analyze that data, claims data, outcomes data, and that can yield really interesting insights. So it's the kind of work that a lot of my colleagues will be doing at Duke and Carolina.
That's great. One of the things I'm curious about, North Carolina has been one of the slowest to adopt the Medicaid transformation project. Can you speak a little bit to that, and what pushes North Carolina forward in order to take the benefit of that federal funding?
Sure. Is that one for me, Mason, on Medicaid expansion?
Yeah.
So Mesfin mentioned the Medicaid managed care transformation, which is ongoing, but we have not expanded Medicaid. And there have been 38 other states in the District of Columbia that have expanded Medicaid. Just for those who are watching who might not have been tracking this as closely, the Affordable Care Act in 2010 was passed and allowed for the expansion of Medicaid, but the Supreme Court made a decision later on that gave states the option to expand Medicaid, with the vast majority of the funding for Medicaid expansion be provided initially by the federal government, and then that amount ratio would decrease over time. So 38 other states and the District of Columbia have done that since 2012, I think, when the Medicaid expansion became an option, and then since 2010 with the Affordable Care Act passage. North Carolina is not part of that, and there are definitely folks who are pushing for it to happen in North Carolina, including me. I won't say too much more about it, just because I think we haven't wanted to delve into politics here on this, but I think ultimately, if leaders who are elected in North Carolina, people like myself, have the choice, if voters elect us to do it, we will expand Medicaid in North Carolina. The reason it's very popular in North Carolina, I would say, and it's become more popular, is because our rural areas in particular recognize the value of expanding Medicaid, both for healthcare outcomes and access, but also economic vitality. And so you're seeing an unusual coalition in North Carolina between folks who've supported for a long time and other folks who support it because it may not be in line with some of the other issues that they're voting for at the top of the ticket, but it is in line with the interest of the local community. It's those kinds of coalitions, I think, that will get good things done in North Carolina. We're ultimately a purple state, so the issues and the leadership we have are going to have to be forged across common ground. I think Medicaid is one of those, but heretofore it has not happened because we have a different political configuration.
Got it. So we have a couple audience questions coming in now, so I'll throw these to whoever wants to take them on. How can we work to progress and change the dialogue on healthcare so it isn't so divisive along party lines? And I think, like you said, this isn't a policy discussion per se, but where is the tension around healthcare discussion, and how can we, have the conversation?
I mean, yeah, go ahead, Darius. You go first. I can go next.
Sure. So I'll give a a perspective from someone who works for a technology company and not necessarily someone who has a political, the political context that, say, Ronnie does. What I can say is, at least from what I've observed, most of the conversation has been around economic terms, i.e., who pays, where is the money coming from, etc. I think we need a paradigm shift in the dialogue towards the patient terms, meaning what are the outcomes, who benefits, why is it that access to healthcare in this country is so far behind that of nations that have, frankly, far fewer means to achieve the outcomes that they achieve. And I think if we shift the dialogue to the patient, frankly, it changes the rhetoric in a meaningful way. It is inherently apolitical. And it also, frankly, puts the onus on companies like ours to continue to innovate and to drive technologies to market that will not only reduce the cost of care, but also improve patient outcomes. And so, we tend to eschew, obviously, any political conversations and to focus on the facts. And the facts remain that there is a lot of wood to chop in this country with respect to improving patient outcomes and with respect to reducing the cost of care. And that can be enacted through politics. It can also be enacted through the introduction of, technologies like ours across For Catalyzer, which are also moving us towards better outcomes for patients.
I think that's a really astute point, actually, in terms of how to reframe this discussion. One thing I just will say to add is that the Affordable Care Act, popularly known as Obamacare, was very controversial when it was passed. It went through the political process, and by the end of it, was quite unpopular. Although at the beginning, it had numerous really popular provisions, things like allowing kids to stay on their parents' insurance until they were 26, things like protecting pre-existing conditions. So one thing to understand, just a person now who's involved in the political arena, there's sometimes a menu of really popular things that get together and then in the political battle. And there's a larger polarization going on in this country that affects all issues. Healthcare, Affordable Care Act became less popular. But now, 10 years in, right, after it's been implemented and people see the benefits, I don't think it's nearly as controversial as it was then. In fact, the Affordable Care Act enjoys a lot of popularity. I think in a poll last week, it hit 60% approval. And we see a lot of folks who want to protect it and preserve it. It's also been owned now by many states who've expanded Medicaid and put their own imprint on it. So healthcare is definitely a divisive argument in some ways, but I look at things like the Affordable Care Act. I look at things like Medicare Prescription Part D, which are now much more popular than they were when it got passed. I look at things like Medicare and Social Security itself that are much more popular than they were when they were passed. And I think over time, the benefits of these programs actually are widely shared and more popular. It does take time to get this. I will say, as a person running for office the first time, the number one thing I hear on the campaign trail from every single person, Democrat, Republican, particularly before COVID, I think, COVID has crystallized this, but is worried about healthcare costs and access, period. That is the number one issue. And after COVID, it's even more so for a slightly different set of reasons. So I was that impressed upon me that this is an issue that everybody cares about and probably the number one issue in this election that I'm in, but in many, many future elections.
Ronnie, when can we go vote for you? What's the day?
November 3rd is the actual date, but you can always vote early. We voted early today in North Carolina, first day early voting. So there's more days left, but I appreciate it. I think, this is why I'm in this, right? To help create a public sector that is innovative, that can incorporate the innovations from folks like Darius and Mesfin, and also find a way to be a better payer and get more value. So that's what we hope to do. You got to win an election first, though.
Yeah. So, sorry, go ahead, Mesfin.
Yeah, just to make one point. I mean, the question was very valid. Ronnie really has both Ronnie and Darius has really done a good job addressing it. Just let's think of COVID. COVID, since we were impacted by the COVID virus. Today, researchers around the world are developing more than 165 vaccines, and there are 135 of them on preclinical, about 21 of them phase 1. There are 13 on phase 2, 8 on phase 3, and two are now for ready. They presented for approval, like in 6 months' time, 7 months' time. So this is how it can be done right when you don't worry about the politics of it. I mean, this is healthcare. This is providing care to all of us. And then when you really focus on doing the right thing, this is how effective you can be. One can be. So just an example of a situation that made us work together. And now we are very close to getting 2 vaccines approved, and 8 of them are in phase 3.
Yeah, I think just to dovetail on that point, obviously the old adage applies here. Necessity is indeed the mother of all invention. And what we see in situations and environments like the current one is not just the acceleration of new vaccines and therapies, but also the acceleration of generational changes in the adoption of new technology. And I think the most poignant example of that is with the adoption of telemedicine and telemedicine-enabled solutions. And by the way, there's been a proliferation of political response to that, right? Insofar as many of what were traditionally rigid laws around telemedicine between state lines have been relaxed. And I actually see this as, one could say one of the few good outcomes of the current pandemic, which is telemedicine adoption has been accelerated by more than a decade. And I mean what I say there. And that's something which frankly is going to help further improve the issue of access to care. When we consider the fact now that, with the smartphone and a connected device, you can access, your primary care physician, your cardiologist, your OBGYN. That is a completely different world than the world we lived in just 7 months ago, when telemedicine was considered to be, a distant reality that may or may not come to bear in the next 10 years.
To come off that, Darius, a lot of audience questions have been around data privacy, and with the uptick in telemed solutions, for pharma, you have companies like Romans and Hims where you can order your drugs through your phone. You have Butterfly where your images are going up into a cloud. How are companies protecting the privacy of patients?
Yeah, look, I can speak on behalf of Butterfly, but obviously not beyond that. What I can tell you is, we take patient information very seriously. We have a HIPAA compliant cloud, and we have the broadest FDA clearance ever for an ultrasound device. So from a regulatory and data privacy perspective, we hold a very high bar. What we do is we take the anonymized images, which have no patient identifying information on them, and we actually use that in our cloud to train our AI applications and machine learning applications. And that's what we call our virtuous cycle. The more data we have in our cloud on an anonymized basis, the more predictive and the more accurate our AI and machine learning applications can become, which in turn improve the offering both from a software and hardware perspective to the practitioners who are using this. So it is a virtuous cycle and a flywheel that perpetuates as you have more devices out in the field, more data which is being captured, all in a secure and HIPAA compliant way.
Great. Question from Amir. Adoption of technology is low among certain poorer and older demographics within the US. However, these tend to be the groups that benefit the most from new medical innovations. I suppose he's wondering, are people left behind if they aren't up on this tech trend, or how do you pull along the underserved that would benefit most from these technologies? Maybe to Ronnie, how does like CMS think about this? And then if anybody else wants to chime in, feel free.
Sure. I mean, health equity is clearly a big issue that we're thinking about in a country where lots of people don't have health coverage, and there's really disparate outcomes depending on your income level, the neighborhood you live in, and your race. And so as you think through these issues, we also have to design a healthcare system that doesn't just have the most fantastic innovations, but make sure those innovations are disseminated to a wide variety of people. In a lot of other markets, innovations are disseminated by the ability to pay, right? The customer value proposition. Those who can afford to adopt innovation, the ones who get it. Over time, innovations improve, they get cheaper, and a wider variety of people can afford them. That's what happened with smartphones, for example, which are much more accessible to folks than they were 10 years ago. In healthcare, though, the cost of diffusion, right? The cost of healthcare technologies moving slowly across the population can be very costly because we're talking about people's lives and their health. And so this is where the public entity has a compelling interest to make sure that healthcare innovations are more widely disseminated. You see this mostly in developing country contexts with licensing around drugs. You also see it with efforts by companies like General Electric to really pioneer what they call reverse innovation, looking for ways to develop innovations in places like India, in countries in Africa, to try to figure out how homegrown innovations that are made at a cost point that actually, or price point that actually makes sense for the local market can be developed. So I think companies are thinking about it strategically through that way. Payers are thinking about it in terms of trying to speed up the diffusion of innovations to a wider set of people. This is the big challenge, though, because in a lot of markets, we often find innovations are sorted by who's the willingness to pay and how much people can pay. Healthcare is different because of the third-party payer, but then a lot of folks don't have insurance to begin with. So that's one of the challenges as we think about that. It doesn't mean that innovation and entrepreneurship can't be positive for the system. It just means that we need to think about the context in which those innovations are developed and disseminated.
That's right. I think there's a misconception that most innovative technologies are prohibitively expensive, right? And it is true that when we consider certain gene therapies or surgical robotics, the innovation is at the high end, but innovation can also be at the low end, right? And that's precisely, our approach at Butterfly. It's to introduce something that has clinical equivalency to the incumbent technologies, which are 10 to 25 times the cost, right? Innovation at the low end is democratization. And that's really the approach we've taken. Now, the issue about health equity is not just solved through introduction of technologies that are affordable, but also the proliferation of education around these technologies. Education, not just to the provider, but also to the patient. Right? We as patients, it's incumbent on us to also be educated to be able to ask our providers for what is new, what is in our best interest, etc. It's a two-way dialogue. And oftentimes we rely too heavily, too unilaterally on the provider to prescribe to us what we should be taking, how we should be treated, etc. And so to the extent that we can actually perpetuate education to both parties, to all the actors in this healthcare continuum, that is going to vastly, vastly change the game and address head on the question which is being asked, which is around access to care, particularly for those who are most disadvantaged. I think you're muted, Mason.
Got it. Thanks.
Yeah.
Again, I just want to start by saying thanks for coming on. This has been excellent. First time we've tried something like this, but it's great to hear your guys' perspective. I think it's an encouragement to the entrepreneurs and the innovators out there. It gives them a general sense of the healthcare landscape, how COVID has affected us in the moment, and then what the future looks like. So if we could start with Mesfin, if you have any closing remarks that you would just like to share with the audience, I think that'd be great, and then we can go around.
Yeah. Thanks, Mason. This is a great conversation. I appreciate the invite again. We, the innovators and the healthcare providers, are going to succeed in this to meet our needs only if we were to work together in a meaningful way, focused on improving outcomes and the quality of healthcare and outcomes. So I would ask that all of us who are in the space just be focused on innovating, be focused on making the patient focus on patient-centric ideas and thinkings and models. If we do that, then we'll get this thing right, patient-centric, and then we'll absolutely get it right. And once again, thank you. And Ronnie, good luck.
Thank you. Oh, you want to go next? I know Darius. I'll go next. I'll say, so first, thanks, Mason, Mesfin, Darius. I'll say I actually take one thing from everybody I think we should take home. So I think Mesfin's point that really resonated with me is that incentives matter. And if you're a healthcare innovator, the rate and direction of how you develop your innovations depends on the incentives, the rules of the game. And to Darius's point, which I think his last point was excellent, which is how can we in the public and private sector align the incentives, align the rules of the game to push more innovation in the direction of high value, low cost innovation, the way that Darius's company is developed. That would be a really exciting phenomenon. And I guess if I can leave with one thing, I think that the interaction with the public sector necessarily makes a lot of this political. And so if you want to be a healthcare innovator and entrepreneur, you don't have to take a political position, but you need to understand how our political institutions work and how they make decisions, because it will affect your business. And so if you put that all together, you got to do what Mason Plumlee's doing, which is he's got another job, but he's trying to figure out by synthesizing all these different perspectives about how to think about innovation in this sector, which is much more complex than almost anyone I can think of in terms of healthcare versus other sectors. And so I think taking that synthetic view across all these different points of perspective is really important for healthcare innovators specifically. And so if you're watching, I think that would be my advice to you to take that approach.
Very, very well said, Ronnie. And thank you again, Mason, for inviting me on this panel with Mesfin and Ronnie. It's been a pleasure learning from them both on their perspectives and insights. I think the one thing that I would just leave the audience with is we tend to talk about innovation as something that's distant. The name of this panel is The Future of Healthcare, right? The reality is the future has arrived. It's today, right? The interesting thing is it's just not evenly distributed. And there's a great quote about that I'm forgetting right now, but the future is not evenly distributed, and that's because of all the issues that we've discussed today: access, the prohibitive cost, etc. But just because the future is not evenly distributed doesn't mean we can't make a change in a very material way, even in our local communities. And I think one of the important things that COVID has highlighted is there is ample opportunity in this day and age, more so than ever before, to make a material impact in the healthcare space, because the healthcare space has never been more receptive to change than it is today. The regulations we've discussed today, which have been easing, the focus, the necessity for innovation has never been more pronounced. And so it's incumbent on us as innovators, as technologists, as people who are passionate about healthcare, and the delivery of that care, to think about creative ways that we can move the ball forward and we can continue to innovate and drive change, because there is no better time than now, and we can't wait for the future to come. We actually have to have an active role in it.
Excellent. Well, thank you guys again. This has been great. It's a privilege to host this, and look forward to what's next.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.